Just like in most, if not all, adaptations of the Sonic the Hedgehog game franchise, the Archie Sonic Comics version has Dr. TWO Robotnik as the main villain. While he resembles his counterpart from the ABC Saturday morning cartoon series, depending on the writer, his behavior can range from his menacing self from said Saturday morning cartoon, his goofier self from the Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog cartoon, or a mixture of the two. Regardless of how he behaves, he is a dangerous world-conquering mad scientist with an army of robots by his side, with the ability to create more robotic slaves via roboticizing ordinary Mobians. Sonic the Hedgehog and his Freedom Fighter friends were able to thwart the Doctor's schemes whenever they could. Eventually things would come to a head in issue 50 of the series, when Robotnik planned to erase the heroes from existence with his weapon, the Ultimate Annihilator. Sonic and Robotnik would have one final battle while the machine malfunctioned, resulting in reality being erased momentarily. Everything was brought back immediately, except for Robotnik. His nephew Snively rigged the machine to target only him. So for all intents and purposes, Robotnik is kaput. Now why get rid of the main villain in the first place? Well, from what I've read and remember, Archie Sonic was going to conclude its run at issue 50, but then it was decided that the series would go on. As for the Robotnik situation, he was allowed to go bye-bye, but he would have to be brought back by the comic's next milestone. Hi there, Editor Me here. About what I said regarding Robotnik coming back at the next milestone, it's possible that it's speculation on my part. I remember reading something about it somewhere, but I couldn't find the source anywhere. If by some chance any of you watching this comes across something about an executive mandate regarding Robotnik's death and return, feel free to post it in the comments below. Anyway, let's get back to Robotnik's return. How was this to be done, you might ask? Undo the effects of the Ultimate Annihilator and bring him back into existence? Nope. Bring in a Robotnik from an alternate universe who turned himself into a robot and then would go on to inhabit the modern Dr. Eggman body. If you think that's complicated, oh boy, we haven't even scratched the surface. So today, we're going to explore the Robotnik that took over the main villain role. Not only does it involve the aforementioned robotization and the multiverse, it may or may not even involve another version of Dr. Robotnik. So allow me to present to you the tale of Robo-Robotnik, the villain that became Dr. Eggman. Before getting started, I'd like to point out that, with a few exceptions, I'm only covering what is essentially Dr. Eggman's origin story today. Since the multiverse is involved, I might as well start there. Issue 11 introduced the Archie Sonic multiverse, and the means to travel from one universe, or zone, to another, the Cosmic Interstate. In that issue, Sonic used it and accidentally wound up in a world with an evil version of himself and his friends. The multiverse would be revisited in issue 19, when a Sonic variant arrived in the main Sonic's home of Mobius Prime, Cyborg Sonic. The reason he's a cyborg is because the Robotnik of his universe turned him and his fellow freedom fighters into cyborgs. That was a big mistake for Robotnik because the cyborg freedom fighters used this new strength to tear through the Doctor's forces with ease, and they were very close to winning. In an act of desperation, Robotnik subjected himself to his own robotization process, and afterwards, managed to completely crush the Resistance. Cyborg Sonic escaped into the multiverse in order to gather allies because his Robotnik, now known as Robo-Robotnik, was now a threat to all worlds, including Mobius Prime. After hearing about this new threat, Sonic Prime was able to gather many variants of himself to unite against Robo-Robotnik. However, they were caught off guard when Robo-Robotnik appeared alongside an army of Shadow SWAT bots. Robotnik Prime, who's monitoring the situation, sent his SWAT bots to deal with them because Mobius is his to conquer. Robo-Robotnik then retreated for the moment. Robotnik Prime aided the Sonics by deducing what Robo-Robotnik is ultimately after, the Giant's Hand, the compact form of a very powerful mech known as Giant Borg. It's located in the Cosmic Interstate's neutral zone, so Sonic and a bunch of his variants went out to retrieve it. Robo-Robotnik, who did some monitoring of his own, sent the one Sonic variant who would help him, Evil Sonic. The evil doppelganger managed to distract the Sonics long enough for Robo-Robotnik to teleport the giant hand away. With the power of Giant Borg at his disposal, Robo-Robotnik proceeded to wreak havoc on Mobius Prime. Sonic led his heroic doppelgangers against the machine, and when they managed to get it off balance, they spin-dashed into it, tearing it to pieces, with the side effect of Robo-Robotnik himself being reduced to a head. Cyborg Sonic took the head back to his home dimension as a souvenir, while the other Sonic variants took a piece of Giant Borg home with them. That way, no one, like say Robotic Prime, would have a chance to reassemble the machine. You might be thinking, hold on, Robo-Robotnik was supposed to turn into Eggman and become the replacement main villain, and yet he was scrapped in issue 19. Like I said, the multiverse is involved in this tale, and we're not done yet. In issue 22, Robotnik Prime himself would take a trip throughout time and space, courtesy of one of his own experiments, Eve. He wound up in an alternate future where Sonic is king, married to Sally, and they have a couple of kids. He encountered them briefly before being teleported to a decrepit satellite, and encountered its sole occupant on the monitor, Robo-Robotnik. However, this is not the same Robo-Robotnik from earlier. This one explained that in the final battle with his Sonic, things went so bad that he subjected himself to the robotization process in order to win. This already sounds similar to Cyborg Sonic's Robotnik, but if you look at this panel, it shows that this Sonic is 100% flesh and blood. It's also revealed that this Sonic, despite Robotnik turning into a robot, actually won. In a desperate move, Robo-Robotnik uploaded his mind into the satellite. Because it was incomplete, he essentially doomed himself to run the station until it runs out of power eventually. In other words, he's given up. Robotic Prime refused this outcome. He believed Robo-Robotnik lost only a battle and not the war. Both were still alive to strike back, and thanks to Robo-Robotnik, Robotic Prime returned to his universe determined to win. As I mentioned in the intro, it didn't quite work out for Robotic Prime. During the lull period between Robotnik's demise and the appearance of his successor, Sonic and his fellow freedom fighters were busy dealing with the fallout of the former, including cleanup, dealing with other villains, and dealing with the roboticized Mobians, or Robians. Most of them that were in the general area of the Ultimate Annihilator had their free will restored. It's around this time that a mysterious figure began activating a series of 8 satellites that caused some mayhem for the heroes, including freeing minor prisoners, hurling giant meteors at Mobotropolis, deploying giant mutant creatures twice, caused an avalanche that nearly buried Sonic and Tails, hijacking a signal to broadcast the late Robotnik's biography, and last but not least, messing with an already present temporal anomaly. The end result causing Sonic to transform into his modern incarnation. I'm not joking. The satellites were labeled by letters. For instance, there's an R satellite, 2 O satellites, a B satellite, a T satellite, and I believe you know where this is heading. Heck, even the comic literally spells this out, as eventually, the satellites combine into one, forming the Robotnik Space Station. Sonic and his friends would catch on to the strange activities caused by the satellites. Around the same time, the free-willed Robians, including Sonic's family, suddenly disappeared. Believing the satellites were responsible, the freedom fighters went into space and infiltrated the space station. On board, they located the missing Robians, who have reverted back to their enslavement behavior. They also encountered 2 different variations of Shadow Swap bots, and finally, they discovered the one responsible for it all, Robotnik himself, who's apparently alive. But as I've already revealed in the intro, this is not Robotnik Prime. Our heroes soon find out for themselves, as during a brief fight between Sonic and Robotnik, the latter gets drenched in corrosive chemicals, which caused him to lose his disguise. Now that Robo-Robotnik's identity is revealed, the question is, which version of Robo-Robotnik is taking over as the main villain? At first it appeared to be the version from issue 19, as those events were brought up. There's evidence to support this, as that version of Robo-Robotnik used Shadow Swap bots previously, and to jump ahead a bit, he mentioned Giant Borg. Now prior to this story, This Robo-Robotnik recruited Evil Sonic to track down the various pieces of Giant Borg from the other Sonic variants in order to reassemble the machine. And Evil Sonic's reaction indicated that he recognized Robo-Robotnik. That plan fell apart when Evil Sonic delivered Giant Borg to the wrong Robotnik. The one from Sonic Underground, in fact. In case you're wondering, it was destroyed for good. Anyway, it appears that this is the Robo-Robotnik from issue 19. That is until Robo-Robotnik brought up stuff related to the events of issue 22, i.e. Robotnik Prime's meeting with the second Robo-Robotnik on the decrepit satellite. Turns out, when he teleported Robotnik Prime home, he took the chance to scan his mind and learned about Giant Borg and its fate. From there, he was able to track down the piece of Giant Borg in his home dimension and was able to build himself a new body. Afterwards, he proceeded to wipe out his universe's Sonic and the royal family. Then he learned about the demise of Robotnik Prime. So he decided to travel to Mobius Prime, to paraphrase, fill the void in both he and Sonic's lives. It's unknown where the plan to acquire Giant Borg falls into this, but it doesn't really matter at this point. Some of you might be confused about the amalgamation of the two Robo-Robotniks. Allow me to explain. Ken Penders, writer of both issues 19 and 22, did indeed intend for the two Robo-Robotniks to be the same one. He had his own plans for the character, which didn't pan out, but the concept of the two Robo-Robotniks being one would be utilized by another writer, Carl Bollers, who was the head writer around the time issue 75 came out, and he pretty much did what I just summed up. If I were to guess why the two Robo-Robotniks were made one, it's probably for the readers. Remember, Archie Sonic was made for a younger audience in mind, and when it was decided to simplify things with Robo-Robotnik, it was believed that would be for the benefit of that particular audience. In reality, it created a big old plot hole. While it's true that both versions of Robo-Robotnik roboticized themselves out of desperation to win, the two scenarios were different. The first Robo-Robotnik was against the Cyborg Freedom Fighters, and he won. The second fought against a fully organic Sonic and lost, and was only able to save himself by uploading his mind into the satellite. So unless King Sonic and his friends somehow reversed their cyborg transformation, or got skin grafts, I believe there are two Robo-Robotniks. So did the comic's final head writer, Ian Flynn. As he once said, whoever is the head writer of the book is the word of God. And he said there are two Robo-Robotniks. Originally, there were plans to clarify the Robo-Robotnik situation in the Archie Sonic Encyclopedia, but that never came to pass. The closest thing would be a data file about Robotnik found in the Free Comic Book Day 2011 special, which contains stuff only relevant to the Robo-Robotnik of issue 22. To put it simply, the official retcon is there are two Robo-Robotniks, and the one from issue 22, i.e. the one that was stuck on the half-finished satellite and met Robotnik Prime, is the one causing trouble for Sonic around issue 75. There is also the possibility that issue 19's Robo-Robotnik did send his mind to the future timeline of issue 22, but that would introduce a number of headache-inducing plot holes. Since I don't want to subject any of you guys to this idea, I'm just going to go ahead and toss it out. As far as I'm aware, the Robo-Robotnik from issue 22, and only issue 22, is the one the heroes discovered on the satellite station. With that in mind, let's see if we can explain some discrepancies within the context of the Archie Sonic verse. First of all, there's Robo-Robotnik bringing up the events of issue 19 to Sonic and his friends. I think he was just messing with them. Why not? He was already using the satellites to screw with them before the big reveal. What makes this scenario more plausible is, when Robotnik Prime visited Robo-Robotnik on the satellite, he briefly mentioned his encounter with another alternate version of himself. So when Robo-Robotnik sent Robotnik back to his universe, he did scan his mind, probably curious about this alternate Robotnik. Not only did he find out about the first Robo-Robotnik, he found out about Giant Borg and wanted it for himself. Hey, Robotnik Prime wanted Giant Borg in issue 19, and was only stopped when the various Sonic variants stared daggers at him. Speaking of which, apparently King Sonic was one of the variants, as he had a piece of Giant Borg, and once Robo-Robotnik got a hold of said piece, and got his new body, bye bye King Sonic and his family. Because he resembled Robo-Robotnik number 1, he was able to easily recruit Evil Sonic to get the Giant Borg pieces from the Sonic variants. Admittedly, this one's a bit flawed, as based on this panel, it's implied that Robo-Robotnik is already wearing his Robotnik Prime disguise. Though that would explain how Evil Sonic confused Sonic Underground Robotnik with Robo-Robotnik. Anyway, the implication here is that Evil Sonic thought he was teaming up with the Robo-Robotnik from issue 19 once again, when in reality, it's actually the issue 22 one taking advantage of him. And we know how that turned out. So Robo-Robotnik had to rely on his satellite technology from his world, that's what I assume at least, in order to make his moves on Mobius Prime. And moves he made. While the Freedom Fighters were on board his space station, Robo-Robotnik's army easily swept in and took control of Mobotropolis, forcing many of the people to retreat into Knothole Village. While filling the void was the primary reason for Robo-Robotnik coming to Mobius Prime, I believe there's a secondary reason, and it's to honor Robotnik Prime himself. If you recall, Robo-Robotnik was ready to give up on the satellite. However, Robotnik Prime gave him the motivation to keep going. And kept going he did. Once his business in his home universe was done, he went over to Mobius Prime not only to do things all over again, but to finish what Robotnik Prime started. One of the first things he did when he arrived was to go after Snively. It was actually quite the effort to do so. Remember the satellite that freed the minor villains? Snively was among them. He was sent to jail by the heroes as part of the post-Robotnik cleanup. And then there was the satellite that summoned the giant squid. It was a distraction so that Robo-Robotnik can nab him. Why do all of this? Well, he was the one that rigged the Ultimate Annihilator to erase only Robotnik. So, it's implied that Robo-Robotnik had plans to deal with Snively as revenge. However, Robo-Robotnik was quick to forgive Snively. Supposedly. He could be saying it to put Snively's mind at ease, even though the runt didn't buy it. Or he did forgive him because he had a Snively of his own and knows the kind of treachery he can do. With that said, after Robo-Robotnik became Eggman, he recruited Snively a few more times, though he took precautions to make sure he didn't pull any tricks that would result in the Doctor's demise. Our villain would eventually deal with Snively by imprisoning him after a failed coup, and his spot as lackey would be filled by Orbot and Cubot. So now the time has come to actually address the topic of the video. How did Robo-Robotnik turn into Eggman? It's quite simple really. The Freedom Fighters blew up the space station. Thankfully they, Snively, and the Robians evacuated the station, leaving only Robo-Robotnik to take the blast. However, Robo-Robotnik planned for this possibility. Namely, he pulled the same stunt he did when he lost against his Sonic and transferred his consciousness into another location. Only in reverse, going from a satellite structure in space to the planet's surface below. This time he had a cache of bodies hidden underneath the rechristened Robotropolis, each with a different style, and yet they have some similarities such as the facial hair and them being bald. Since the main game characters were having their designs changed to match their modern incarnations around this time, naturally, Robo-Robotnik downloaded himself into the Dr. Eggman body, and from this point forward, he'd be the main villain until the end of the series. While I said earlier that I'll only be covering how Robo-Robotnik became Dr. Eggman, I do want to highlight a few things about the Doctor that are related to the stuff I've talked about in this video. First, there's the comic bouncing back and forth between Eggman being from another dimension and treating him like he's always belonged to Mobius Prime. Issue 197 provides a possible explanation. When Sonic Prime took Scourge, aka a transformed evil Sonic, to the Zone Cops who police the multiverse, he asked them to take Eggman away as well, since he's also from another universe. The Zone Cops refused. Robo-Robotnik / Eggman's history was identical to Robotnik Prime's up until a certain point. Since Sonic Prime must fight a Robotnik for the sake of Mobius Prime's stability, or in other words to maintain the status quo, Eggman's the best candidate for the job. The series does point out moments where Eggman's history is different, besides the events of issue 22 of course. For example, When he spotted Colin Kintobor, Robotnik's brother, returning from space, long story, he mentioned that he roboticized his Colin years ago. And when Sonic encountered the Kudzu hybrid Hydra sometime later, Eggman did not recognize the machine. So Snively had to explain that it was one of Robotnik Prime's old creations. There is one more notable difference I should mention. Near the end of Robotnik's life, he discovered the hidden village of Knothole where Sonic and his friends lived during the war. Apparently, Eggman did not know the location of the place, at least not right away, as one of the first things he did when he took over was to access Robotnik's files in an attempt to find Knothole. It was only thanks to the heroes uploading a virus to said files that Eggman was denied Knothole's location for a time. You might be wondering about Eggman's method of accessing the files and how a virus might affect him. We'll get to that momentarily. Now let's bring up some of the times the book treated Eggman and Robotnik Prime as one and the same, such as Eggman recognizing and being terrified of the wizard Ixis Naucus. Then there's the time during a pivotal battle with Sonic that he brought up the original coup that happened when Sonic and his friends were kids. It was also during said battle that Sonic brought up the moment he, i.e. Robotnik Prime, died, and Eggman responded that he came back. And when Eggman lost his marbles for a time, he rambled about stuff like having the Batnik Crabmeat as a lackey, just like Robotnik Prime did in the early days of the comic, and mentioning the Ultimate Annihilator. Ultimately, the whole Eggman being from another similar universe thing would be resolved ironically by Eggman himself, which means it's time to once again bring up the Mega Man crossover and the reboot. I may have mentioned this in my other lore videos, but at the end of the crossover, Eggman interfered with Sonic's attempt to restore things to normal, and thus they created the reboot universe. As a consequence, Eggman was fully integrated into the world as his history was rewritten alongside everyone else's. The second major highlight is that when Robo-Robotnik transferred himself into the Eggman body, said body was robotic in nature. This allowed him to directly interface with the computer systems, though this would have its drawbacks, as if he'd say download a computer virus, he would get sick. Eggman would later upgrade the body so that he could roboticize a living being simply by merely touching them. A prime example being Snively. So yeah, for a time the little runt was actually a robot. This was part of a larger Eggman plan to deal with his fellow countrymen, either through this method or via toxic waste poisoning. Having a robotic body would be an advantage in this case. Hopefully, one day I'll talk about this more in a future video. One more advantage that Eggman had with a robotic body was that whenever it was destroyed, he can just download himself into a new one. With one minor exception, it's always a new, identical Eggman body. This would come to an end thanks to the BEM, the aliens that rescued Shadow the Hedgehog after the Sonic Adventure 2 adaptation. They wanted to see which being is superior, organic or robotic. So they kidnapped Sonic, Tails, Eggman, and Snively, and swapped their natures so that the heroes were robots, and the villains were flesh and blood. They were then pitted against each other. The winners would be restored to their previous selves, and the losers would stay in their altered states forever. Naturally, Sonic and Tails won, meaning Eggman and Snively would remain organic for the rest of their lives. The BEM making sure re-robotization would not be possible. One more thing I like to highlight is Eggman briefly reviving Robotnik Prime. Thanks to Knuckles going hardcore into Chaos Energy and messing with reality, Eggman used the opportunity to create a device to reassemble Robotnik's molecules. I'd like to remind you one more time that Robotnik Prime was the one that remotivated Robo-Robotnik / Eggman. So when the opportunity to revive his predecessor came about, Eggman took it. After some confusion, the two came up with a plan to get rid of their mutual enemies. Robotnik Prime would pretend to turn a new leaf so that he could lure the Freedom Fighters into the device and he and Eggman can disperse their molecules. Thing is, that device is the only thing keeping Robotnik Prime around, and when the Freedom Fighters found this out, they deliberately got captured in order to destroy it. With the device gone, Robotnik Prime's molecules dispersed forever. What we just went through today is but a small sample of how complicated the Archie Sonic comics can get. going through all this effort just to replace/revive the main villain by bringing in a variant from an alternate universe. And even that variant's history can vary depending on who's writing him. It would have been much simpler if Robotnik came back by, say, a digital backup memory. And there was a viable method of doing so introduced in issue 50, the very one he died in. Robotnik is seen in some type of machine that he apparently sleeps in. What if he uses this machine while sleeping to update this memory backup unit? And if by some chance Robotnik went bye-bye, like he did at the end of the issue, the backup memory unit would activate after some time passes. Then, a lot of the stuff like building a new body, accusing Snively, utilizing the satellites, and even the Giant Borg stuff could still happen, just without the confusing alternate reality stuff mixed in. But that's not what happened, unfortunately. Still, the origin for this version of Dr. Eggman was unique, and one of the many reasons Archie Sonic was itself a unique piece of media that existed.